I keep noticing people making this gesture at me. Now I'm scared for my life. Posted in r/no sleep by Frantic Temperance. So I grew up in a small countryside town, the kind of place everyone knows each other and you could pretty much walk from one side of the town to the other in less than a day. There was only one school, which held middle and high school classes together, and there was only one square, which was pretty much the place where everyone hung out after school and on the weekends. We were surrounded by mountains and forest pretty much all the way around. I think I was about 8 or 9 years old when I consciously noticed a kid I knew just disappeared. He was not a close friend, but a boy I would see almost every day around school or in the square's playground. And someday I just suddenly realized I hadn't seen him around in weeks. When I asked my parents about him, they didn't seem to remember who I was talking about, and since I didn't know the kid very well, I just shrugged the whole thing aside. The following years, though, I started noticing the same thing repeating itself. It was always around the end of September. One day a kid would simply stop showing up at school, and then I would never see the kid's face again, and that got me curious, so I started asking questions. That year, I noticed a girl a couple years older than me was gone. I was about 13 to 14, and the girl was probably 16. Since I remembered always seeing her with the same group of teens at the square, I looked for them to see if they knew anything. They were not much older than me, but the fact that I was younger probably didn't help. They were also sad and pissed with the whole disappearance of their friend. So, at first, I couldn't get many answers out of them. They basically ended up telling me to fuck off, but I kept going after them every day, cautiously, and finally this girl, Jen, talked to me. The girl that disappeared, Annie, was the friend of Jen, and Jen was the first one to be bothered by her not showing up. At the time, we didn't have access to cell phones or the internet, so the only way to get in touch with someone is just to go to their house. So Jen went to her parents' house and asked about her, and they just sent her off without telling her anything. The more we thought about it, the stranger it seemed. Imagine, there's a small town and a kid goes missing, but there's no commotion at all. The grown-ups don't talk about it, and there's nothing on the local news. The teachers at school don't seem to even notice. Jen noticed all these things I didn't even think about before. I mean, in such a small town, I would imagine a big search party and a huge community effort to look for a missing kid, right? But no. Every year, another kid was gone and nobody seemed to care. At the time, considering we were in a small, faraway countryside town on top of it all, we had no access to computers and the internet was not something big at all. So if you needed to look for information, you went to the library. And the only public library in town was the school's, and it wasn't a very big or organized library at all. The most we could get were some old stored regional newspapers, and we couldn't find any mention of kids disappearing in the years before either. We kept investigating and learned the names of some of the missing kids. Jen had an idea to try and find their parents, and one of them surely might have some information, we thought. But after finding and talking to them, things just got weirder. Look, they could have just denied it all, right? Billy? Never heard of him. Or they could have just made up some lie, like, oh, little Susie, she went to live with her granny in the big city. But no, all the parents we talked to did the same thing. They just avoided the subject, neither confirming nor denying the very existence of a missing kid in the first place. I mean, yeah, it made some sense. The kids had nothing to say about the disappearance of their friends, and eventually just ignored it all. Their parents just shrugged it off and were just vague and unconcerned. At least we could confirm the existence and disappearance of their friends, but they just didn't worry about it. Jen and I were the weird ones. I noticed there were no pictures of missing kids at any of the parents' homes, but it was Jen who told me that a lot of the parents looked weirdly nauseated when we asked about them, and almost always would hug their bellies and touch their mouths. A whole year went by and we got nothing. Losing our momentum, we eventually stopped investigating, and all the time went by without an answer. But Jen and I kept talking to each other and became close friends. When the next September came by, I noticed Jen getting a little weird. She seemed anxious, worried, and whenever I asked her if there was something wrong, she would just shrug it off. But as the days went by, she started to look worse. By the point, she was actually being paranoid and avoiding leaving her house. I was so worried that one night I went to Jen's house and climbed to her room's window. She was a mess. I told her that I wouldn't leave until she told me what was going on. Jen seemed to really not want to talk about it, but eventually caved. She told me that she thought there were people after her. When I asked who, she just told me people. She said she noticed them around town just looking at her, and when they crossed their eyes, these people would just make a gesture at her, and then she reproduced the gesture at me while looking straight into my eyes. She rolled her tongue out and touched the tip of it with her right index finger. After making the gesture, she started sobbing and didn't want to say anything else. I just kept hugging her in silence until the birds started chirping outside. When I left, I looked back and waved a goodbye to her at the window, and that was the last time I saw her. I didn't notice at all, or possibly they were hiding it from me, but my parents were very worried about me and the things that I said about the whole investigation, and you can imagine how much worse I was after Jen disappeared. By October of that same year, my parents had already arranged for us to move to another city. By December, we were gone. Somehow I felt like they were trying to protect me. Anyways, I never noticed how good we had it until we moved out. I don't even remember getting sick at any point in my life before we moved. We could always eat just whatever we wanted, and all the kids that I knew had everything they ever wanted, but after we moved out, we struggled with bills, had to save money for food, and my mom was actually hospitalized for days because of a disease. Things were just harder, but that's just how things are in the big city, right? Well, my parents are gone now. My father died of lung cancer, and my mother recently passed away from cardiac arrest. Her blood pressure got very bad over the years, and I'm kind of fucked. I have not got much money and can't really pay the rent for the crappiest places out here, but we never sold our old house in the hometown, and I ended up inheriting it, so it's a roof over my head at least, right? So here I am once more, back in my hometown, and not much has changed over here. The place is still great, the air is pure, and I have no idea how the internet is so great out here, even though we are in the middle of nowhere. The problem is, I'm a little paranoid. Now that you know about my childhood, you can imagine why, and you see, lately, every time I go outside, I see them. People, just random people around town, they stare at me, and when we cross eyes, they roll out their tongues and do that gesture that Jen was talking about. Hey everyone, this is Supernatural KY here. Thank you for listening. There will be a part 2 of this series coming out very soon. Have a nice night.